Right, so we had some highlights there of 2018, 2019 for ONGEA, the Eastern African Music Summit. ONGEA is an initiative, a corporate social investment platform to help develop an industry that is more professional, transparent, and profitable for all. So today, let's start off with our first webinar, which is about we were disrupted, what next? And what's interesting about this webinar is that our theme for the 5th annual in 2020 was disrupt to thrive. And what we meant by that, and that was in February last year, what we meant by that is we really need to disrupt our industry to take it to the next level. Little did we know that disruption was around the corner with some of the COVID-19 outbreaks in China and starting to go across the world. And we really got the brunt of it now in the creative industry and in Eastern Africa about a month later. So this panel is comparing rather the local and international recovery plans for the creative industry in Africa and throughout the world. So I'd like to introduce our moderator for today. He is the Executive Director of Music in Africa Foundation, Eddie Hetitier. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone. So briefly, the Music in Africa Foundation is a Pan-African organization. I'll quickly introduce what we do. We support African music professionals. That's our main mission. And we run quite a number of projects from events such as ONGEA. We have our Pan-African Music Conference called Access. We run a website, quite a popular platform called musicinafrica.net, which provides information and opportunities for professionals to connect and exchange. We do mobility funding. We are also doing new funding models, I think things that we'll also discuss later in the panel. And I'm based here in Johannesburg and really happy to be moderating this panel. I would like to take the opportunity to hand over to my colleagues, starting with Evelyn Ziba, who I believe is joining us from Germany, to give us a very short introduction of what they're doing there. After that, we'll go to Raoul, who is in Rwanda, and then Njoki will finish, and then we'll move to the next stages. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Yep, you were correct, Eddie. I'm joining in from Germany, Hamburg. Sunny but cold in our winter. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really looking forward to finding out more during this discussion for myself as well. I represent Reeperbahn Festival, which is the biggest European music industry conference happening once a year in Hamburg. We have about it's now around about 6,000 delegates coming to Hamburg for the event, for about 600 performances. And then there's 50,000 fans it's an urban in the city festival. And we also tried to build bridges for the European music industry to Africa, to the African continent, in joint partnership with Music in Africa. So I've actually been to Kenya and I've been to Ghana, and I'm really enjoying sharing experiences and knowledge throughout that whole time. So looking forward to this.
Thank you, Evelyn. We'll go to Raoul.
Hi, everyone. My name is Raoul Gamba. I'm from Rwanda, and I'm the founder of HEVA Agency, a creative and communication agency, and I'm also the founder of African Colors, a Pan-African catalyst for culture and creative industry ecosystem. So thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure, and happy to share with you all. Thanks.
Thank you. Njoki, are you able to give us a short intro?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Wonderful. My name is Dr. Njoki Ngumi. I am the Learning and Development Manager at HEVA Fund. HEVA is a Creative Economy Catalyst Fund, which was founded in 2013 in Nairobi, Kenya. We are Africa's first exclusively creative economy fund, and our commitment is to ensure the growth of direct individual practitioners via direct financing, the growth of the community via continuous capacity building and business support, and the growth of the general sector in our country, in the region, and on the continent. Thank you so much, and this is a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, so let's just share one or two house rules before we start the discussion. So I'm told by my colleagues there at ONGEA that your questions are very welcome. So we have 1 hour to finish. I think that's about 50 minutes from now. And generally we will start the first part of the discussion with some exchanges among the panelists. And then we'll leave about 15 minutes for Q&A. This means that your questions are very much welcome. Actually, you are very much welcome to type in your questions as we are going, and I will be taking note of those questions. I might throw in one of your questions. Again, we are here as people who are operating in this sector from different angles, so we very much welcome your opinions. We are not saying that all that we're discussing here is everything there is to share. So we are here to guide the discussion, I think, and we also welcome your guidance and your contributions. I think this topic is one that we've been also enjoying and discussing for many months now since we got into the pandemic. What we want to do is to focus on the recovery models, to look at the realities, not necessarily focus too much on the challenges. I think what we want to do on these platforms is to share information that can help us learn something new, something that could be, pragmatic, and something that we could possibly, implement in our own ways. So that could be the underlying theme that we can go with today. And I would like to find out from my panelists today. We could start with you, Njoki, because you are working for the HEVA Fund, which is quite a unique organization. And I would like to know from your perspective, where do you see the creative industry at the moment? And maybe you can also give us an idea of how you are addressing this whole pandemic situation. What can we expect in the near future?
I mean, maybe what I can do is kind of introduce the idea that you can't know what's going on unless you do research, unless you collect data, unless you analyze this data, and then you kind of use that data to create a frame for a response, and to create a theory that'll kind of help you figure out what exactly you want to do. Could somebody please share my slides and start at number 9, please?
I'm just going to ask you to please also speak a little bit louder. I think we are struggling to catch you. Your voice is very soft.
No problem. That's so interesting because I'm always accused of being loud. Can you hear me now?
Much better. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'll just kind of hold the microphone next to my mouth. If you could please, Courtney, if you could please scroll down to number 9, slide number 9, please. Yes, the slide before this, please. Yes, I think the first thing to mention is that at the beginning of the pandemic, at HEVA we commissioned a study into how the pandemic had affected creative and cultural practitioners in Kenya. We've since been able to commission studies into the same in Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. Each of those studies are at different stages of of being finished, and that data will be out as soon as we can make it ready. That being said, we were able to study Kenya as early as 2 weeks after the Kenyan president announced the stay-in-place regulations and rules to contain the spread of the coronavirus. And the slides before this were just a general summary of what was found in our report, which you can download from our website, which is www.hevafund.com. That's www.hevafund.com. I wanted to start with this particular slide, which is about the suggestions that the respondents themselves had for what support for them and for their sector would look like, because it's really, really important to look at exactly what the people that need the support want. You can't support people with your own little plan about how you're supposed to support them. You should listen to what they want first and make sure that whatever plans that you may have come up with or whatever completely harmonize with what exactly they feel like they need. We found that 36% of respondents from the Kenya survey, and remember that the Kenya survey, we had 510 respondents, so 36% of them trusted that the state would be a good dispenser of COVID-19 SME support for artists, which for us was very interesting. 30% of people thought that their sector unions, associations, and guilds could do this best. And 12% of people preferred the private sector. So you'll find that that's roughly 42% of people preferring another organization rather than government, but still felt that an association or an organization would be a good plan as regards rolling out support. And then 13% did not trust any organization. And we feel that this 13% are a key statistic, because this speaks to general issues as regards organization and trust that these organizations would work well for creative and cultural practitioners. We found that artists suggested the following possibilities as relevant to them during and after COVID-19. In general, there was money or cash-based support and non-cash support, both of which were thought to be very, very important. Under money-based support, artists said that they needed survival stipends, which included for food, health, and rent, of course, because the types of work and the amounts of work that were available had gone down drastically. There were a lot of cancellations and things like that. You can find the details about that in our report. They also felt like they needed work stipends, which would be under the production grant kind of space. They also felt like debt interventions would be necessary, especially for people who had already taken debt in a pre-COVID time. They wanted to renegotiate their terms in order to reduce interest and extend repayment periods. People also felt like they needed tax breaks and holidays. All of these are very, very relevant. Under non-cash support, we found that people felt that supportive legislation around imports would really, really be useful. People needed imports to resume in order for them to have sales opportunities. People also felt that regulations around online content licensing and royalty payments would be really important. People felt that under government tenders, which are opportunities for a lot of jobs and employment, there should be an allocation for this particular sector. A lot of artists and cultural practitioners felt that a buy local campaign to support their work and outputs would be really, really useful upon the waning of the pandemic, alongside public sensitization and local and international outreach to kind of push a Kenyan brand. The same, of course, could be said for any of the other countries where we've taken out this study. Please go to the next slide, Courtney. Thank you. As regards solutions, because that's exactly where Eddie had gone. What do HEVA want to do? The first thing we did was to put together a framework, a baseline framework as regards what we thought would be the best way to go. We felt that recovery of the economy from COVID-19 would be based on gradual rollback of social distancing and how businesses could pivot to understand and accommodate for the changed behavior of their clients. Of course, we've been seeing this gradual rollback of social distancing. It's very, very unlikely that unless there's a massive, massive problem, that you're going to have the same kind of global lockdowns that we've had before. At the very most, what we're going to see is going to be kind of city or county or town-based lockdowns. And I mean, we really hope that this will not be the case, but at the very most, that's what's going to happen. It's unlikely that the kind of global closure of borders and all of us being locked down at the same time will happen again. As regards the businesses pivoting to understand and accommodate for their clients' changing behavior, we've also seen quite a bit of this. Remember that this is an analysis that we had began to think through in May 2020, and we've seen a lot of the things that we thought would happen actually roll out in the ways in which we predicted. That, of course, clients have changed behavior. Very few people, a lot of people have changed their views around the kind of events, for instance, that they will attend in person. There's a lot more interest in how to make sure that there's access to digital events, etc. So there's a lot of things like that going on. We found that the factors that are most important as regards the client's changed behavior would include things like presence of a large gathering, the necessity of close human contact during business interaction, and you find things like this are really important, for instance, with fashion when you're trying on clothes, dependence on travel. So do you have to travel to a place in order to access a thing? And then there's also dependence on grants or public expenditure or on international logistics. We find that the dependencies of these things change because a lot of grants themselves went from regular programming to being kind of COVID responsive. That was able to lock out a lot of people from receiving them. There was also, of course, public expenditure, which necessarily and in a very valid way switched towards COVID response as well. So any funds that are available for the creative and cultural sectors, which of course in the priority of sectors, we find that unfortunately we don't rank very high. A lot of those had to be cut on and diverted elsewhere. And then there was also a dependence on international logistics. We found that a lot of people who depended on importing a lot of their inputs, a lot of their actual products, which they then resell, found that there was a lot of issues when the major lockdowns happened. We also found that a dependence on consumer consumption during the pandemic was important. There was, of course, a lot of increased consumption of ready cultural material. We found people who deal in games, for instance, recorded record high sales. We found that platforms, on-demand platforms, video on-demand, music platforms, also recorded a record number of subscribers and such like. We found that people who had ready content to buy also really did well at that point in time, but people who were in the process of production experienced a very different thing. We also felt as though a framework for response to COVID would be time, and we divided the time into 3 phases, which were the emergency phase, which we feel we are kind of easing out of right now. We're very much in the resilience phase as we speak, and the transformation phase will continue to take part towards Q4 of this year, going on to the 3 or so years afterwards, because regardless of, even if we hold all things constant, the world has been irreversibly changed by COVID-19. Kindly go to the next slide. Yeah, we divided subsectors into very high exposure, and medium exposure, and then there was low exposure. For instance, I'll give you the example of very high exposure, where we found that people who dealt in live music, theater, dance and DJs, live entertainment and events, weddings, cultural occasions and event suppliers, museums, galleries, and tangible cultural heritage spaces required large numbers, and the social distancing measures have drastically reduced their occurrence during the pandemic. Those ones are the ones who stood to lose 50% or more of projected revenues for 2020 and indeed going into 2021. So the mitigation of the loss strongly dependent on wider national pandemic control, availability of emergency support and recovery stimulus. Just scroll through the next couple of slides. We did that as well for exposure subsectors like high exposure and I think low to medium. Keep scrolling. Yeah, you can stop there. We found that as regards requirements for funding, we did that per phase. Remember that we had the emergency phase, the resilience phase, and the transformation phase. It would really depend on how each subsector has figured out responses, the different policies and regulations as regards each subsector and its practice, because of course music would not be the same as film, would not be the same as live events. There are people who are doing digital events, their issues would be different than people who feel like they have to do live performances, but even the ways in which their live performances go would have to change. And I guess I will wrap with just kind of going through this thing. In the emergency phase, a lot of survival stipends were necessary, such as food, health and rent. There was also sector organizational capacity building that was needed, legal support, loan concessions, job protections, workplace safety, and preparation for a slow recovery. I can report that at HEVA, for instance, we were able to kind of call everybody who's on our portfolio and kind of pause repayments until multiple things had to be figured out on their part. We've also been in multiple conversations with them as regards what their plans were for recovery and how we can support them in that regard. We were also part of rolling out a survival stipend program to a number of artists within the Kenya space. Under the resilience phase, of course, we find that artists are going to need help. Artists and cultural practitioners are going to need help for legal support to stabilize the supply chains and distribution, understanding the new economy, because a lot of new knowledge is being built now in experimenting with new models. People who had never been online before are going online. People who have been online for a long time are going to need ways in which with the increased influx of competition. Product and distribution models, of course, will also be experimented with. People will need growth capital because the growth phase for very many people had been paused because of COVID. There'll definitely be need for technical assistance, definite need for public art programs, and a definite need for National Arts Council programs. You'll find that a lot of these things have to do with government input because it's not only the private sector that can, for instance, fund public art programs and National Arts Council programs. There can also definitely be space for public-private partnerships. Then definitely the transformation phase will require pivots through innovation. So what are people doing differently? How can they be supported to do those things differently? The research and development phases will also be really, really interesting to focus on. People will need to reskill and retrain. There'll definitely be new technologies and accelerated supply chains, as well as different growth strategies, the growth of artist savings and credit cooperatives, and continued support for public art and National Arts Council programs. So maybe let me just kind of stop there, Eddie, and allow you to continue with the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of research also that we can share about this, but I think one very important thing that we can all acknowledge is that we are still in the pandemic. There are a lot of organizations like HEVA, like Music in Africa. Here in South Africa, we've got quite a lot of research that has been done. And I think one thing we can all agree on is that artists need support at various levels, policy, from the governance, the structures in the industry. In fact, we did also a similar report early on when the pandemic started last year. And this report is also available on our website for free. And it speaks to the same issues that artists are looking at: government, relief funds, donors, education, and all these things. I would like to know from my friend there in Rwanda, you work also with cultural operators, and you are building a network. Maybe briefly, what do you think are the steps that are realistic? Because I do not want to have this conversation on a lot of the, let's say, the notions that government is there to support and that these things should come in. But what are the realistic interventions that are there, and especially for the artists who are joining? How can artists go towards recovery, and what are the realities there, at least from your side in Rwanda there?
So I think I would just speak on a global scale and on a continental scale, and I think the only the way out is changing the policies to have them be more flexible and friendly to the environment. That's the first thing. And the second thing is for artists to reskill, to have new skills, and the third thing is for artists and other players of the industry to adopt the technology, because those are the three main things that I believe are doable and should be adopted to any country and any art operator for this industry to survive after well, we don't know when, but to survive from now moving forward, because we have seen that it's not easy to operate anymore during these times. But on the other hand, we have realized that the market is beyond where you are now. You know, you can sell your product, your goods from anywhere through facilities and opportunities technology bring on board. So I think those would be my three takeaways. Yeah.
Thank you. It has been shared also on these platforms, the opportunity that the creative sectors have now, especially to bring our governments on and our regulators and press them to also intervene and perhaps look now more strategically around the areas of the digital space and its impact on the arts and the regulations, the compliance issues, and the policies that govern these things. But I think here also in South Africa, one discussion that has been quite interesting is the issue of the royalty systems, or the who is an artist and how does a government know who is an artist. And this question came about because immediately after lockdown and this whole thing was blowing up, government wanted to give artists some funds for relief. But I think there was a big issue around who is an artist. How does government know who is an artist? And of course, I think government is still grappling with those issues, and there are still concerns around who is getting the money, who deserves the money, how do we regulate this, how do we formalize this industry? So I want to cross over to Germany, where we've been reading also some things that we thought here in the continent that could be positive in terms of relief, and we understand there are quite a lot of stimulus initiatives there. Evelyn, do you want to give us an idea of just your perspective working with artists, running a very successful festival? How do you see the industry? What would you say are the key things that have helped artists during this time?
Yeah, I would say, answering your last question first, what helped most was supporting the industry itself, where in Germany we are in a quite lucky situation where, well, very, very early on, I think some of you might have read the article about 50 billion support, governmental support towards the creative industry. Well, that includes a lot of, that was very, very early on, I think in March. And so the development was that the actual cultural sector received a fund of 1 billion because a lot of other things were included there. Don't want to go into details. But that's from museums to you know, all cultural sectors, to monuments, and to the movies, gaming industry. So about 15% of this money went into music, so about 150 million. And we just had an announcement that another billion was granted for the culture sector. So it's probably going to be similar, same. So overall, I'd say 300 million will go into the music industry. That's from the government side. And then it's, you have state support as well that you can apply for. So we are in a really, really comfortable situation here. If you look at it from afar, if you go in, of course, the reality is very fierce. And what you just mentioned, Eddie, like who's an artist and who isn't, there has been so many attempts on fraud of getting these funds that it's getting more and more tricky. On the other hand, it's always been very complicated and people don't get any money. So the continuous discussion is that there is that there's money there, but nobody claims it because it's so complicated. So it's a development process. Yes, I will not complain to anybody in Africa about our situation, but it's different. And going back to supporting the artists, I think by supporting the industry, and because then the industry, like our festival, for example, we can pay artists for digital content, which otherwise we wouldn't be able to. And artists have some opportunities with online exposure and also applying for example, having shooting a video on under Corona circumstances that they can use for promotion, so they can apply direct for these grants as well. But the first thing that we had to do here, which is probably similar to Africa, we never had a lobby. We never worked on, like, at festival, they supported themselves. Yes, they're always the ones that survive from governmental money, and those are, of course, surviving further. But most of our industry didn't care about public funds. So that was the first thing that we had to do, especially after seeing there seems to be money available, but it's going in the wrong direction, and also it's not distributed fair, and it doesn't make sense the way that it's structured. So we had to come up with a unified voice, which still is quite vague, but there are certain lobby groups, like festivals have gathered, like the technical side of the industry. They have formed a quite strong voice by now, and which was just never existed before. So I think, and this is what I hear from the US as well, for example, that had the funds for the venues, and before that you see each other as competitor and you don't talk to each other. But in times like this, it actually helps to share information and to work together towards governments and towards private sector as well. Did that answer the question? Is anybody still there? Eddie?
Yes, thank you. So we would like also to understand I think usually when we're talking about the impact of COVID on the artist side, we usually also consider the musician, but also there are a lot of us organizations and who are running our programs. Some of these programs have been affected by the pandemic, cancelled. And for some of us, these are our business, these are our revenue models. So we've seen also now how the internet is providing these opportunities. I believe even this particular event, ONGEA, was initially cancelled, but thanks to the resilience of the team and the possibilities, now we are having the conference digitally. What would you say about that? Do you find that this is something that is sustainable? What do you think? What kind of support? What kind of requests are you getting also in your area? What are your perceptions on this one? Very briefly, please.
You are?
Njoki.
Thank you so much, Eddie, for...
Take the question.
Sorry, you want me to answer now?
Yes, please.
I mean, definitely the vast majority of requests tend to lean towards support with emergency phase kind of requests, which are about dealing with debts that racked up and liabilities that racked up while COVID was happening. There's a lot of people who understandably are having problems with rent. A lot of people had to make very, very difficult decisions and kind of completely reframe how their operations work. A lot of people had to let go of key personnel from their businesses, and they want to be able to get them back in order to recover. If, for instance, you're a fashion practitioner and you have somebody who does your embroidery by hand, you've probably been working with this person 3-4 years, you understand one another perfectly, then you have to let go of this person. But then now maybe people are starting to have their weddings again and whatever, and now you need this person back, but you don't necessarily have the working capital to assure them of a salary. So those are the sorts of things that we're finding. There's also a lot of people who had not necessarily either figured out any e-commerce solutions or complete e-commerce solutions, and so there's a lot of requests for like that. There's also a lot of requests for financing that allows for a market that's completely that's completely different from just the local market. People want to be able to sell things outside the border. We found that some sectors did quite well during 2020, and especially people who are doing interiors and home found that in many ways they had been able to they've been able to do a lot of sales, and especially export sales, but also local sales. And so there are some people who are like, okay, we were not necessarily in a decorative home. We're interested in either partnering with somebody to go into that space or to go into that space ourselves. So that kind of both kind of intra-sector and outside of your own sector pivoting is what we're finding a lot of people are requesting for.
I will just also add a few things. I remember in the brief, Mike said I should try to cover, at least to give people a sense of what is also working, where are we likely going, and if we are seeing things that are working, how are they working? And I would like to answer this question first. Also consulted quite a large number of people in our network, and these are usually mostly active music professionals. And there are some things here that I can share with us here. They seem to think that one of the most important things now for creatives is to create, to remain creative, and to produce as much content as possible. And I completely agree with this one, because I think before COVID, obviously the live music space is quite a lucrative area. But sometimes also you get a sense that a lot of artists focus only on live. There are amazing bands that I can share here who have got incredible tours across the world, but they don't record a lot of stuff. But also this is quite a big revenue model for in other markets. So I'm not surprised to see that a lot of people think that artists should take the opportunity to create more content during these lockdowns, try to monetize this content, looking at platforms, also digital, and also reinventing the ways they approach business and corporates and the likes. Streaming
Can I say something to that, Eddie?
Please do.
I mean, I think what you're saying is true, and a lot of people were able to create a bunch of content during the lockdown. Another thing that we do have to remember, and I think it was in one of my slides, unfortunately I wasn't able to do the whole presentation, is that artists are people too. And so as regards the pandemic, the same artists that the rest of the world was demanding content from for solace, for escape, for comfort, for feeling good, the same artists are also people who also have to wear their masks and move around, who also have to worry where their food is coming from. And so it's really important to also look at artists not just as producers and not just as people who will be able to kind of churn out content eternally, but also as human beings who are dealing with the pandemic in the same way that all other human beings are, who exist within the same parameters all other human beings are existing, who experience different marginalizations in different ways. And so there's definitely the artists who are doing well before the pandemic, who would continue to do well even though the wellness may have kind of reduced. But then there's a lot of people who found multiple things had changed. For instance, we found that the vast majority of women practitioners had to do a lot more care work. Both kind of helping the home, supporting their partners, taking care of their children, figuring out what education was going to look like for those children, and kind of moving back into keeping the household surviving, which sometimes does not include their artistic, cultural, and creative endeavors and enterprises. So the ways in which these things affect the person directly are also very important. And while artists can churn out content, the expectation that they do so can be quite violent.
Thank you for adding that. And I'm happy to hear from you, Evelyn. You've got your hand up.
Yeah. Well, my question would be what we identified here as a problem, and I suppose it's the same in Africa, but I wanted to ask this as a question, is also the demand on creating professional content is also a new cost for the artists. So not only the live income appears, but a lot of conferences, started. Now people are getting more sensible to this, of saying, well, we want an exclusive presentation of your act live. And so what happened was actually that artists were not paid for gigs, and they had the production cost for making those videos. Is that the same? And is there, I know that you have a program with Music in Africa helping with this, but is that same similar situation?
Thank you. And I also invite Raul if you want to say something, but we're raising very important questions here, and these are the realities that a lot of expectation now is on the demand for great content and high quality content. I think this is slightly improving, but in the early days of the pandemic, we saw almost everyone rushing to doing online concerts, and even big brands were doing these concerts. And I think the general consensus there was that there was a lot of, let's say, improvement to be done, especially with how the content was captured, the sound, the creative, everything just wasn't really, meeting the expectation. And we at the Music in Africa Foundation, we viewed it as two things: the lack of resources, and this is money to undertake these productions, which are usually new to a lot of the artists. And secondly, it's just the know-how and the skill to be able to, produce these kind of things at a level that is very professional. So on our side, what we did is we launched a new fund, which we called Music in Africa Live, and it ran for about 6 months. And we were giving funds to artists in different African countries to produce shows. We were marketing these videos. Also, a part of that grant was to produce videos and content on capacity building incentives. So there was quite a lot of ideas that were shared, and we want to continue doing that in the near future. I would invite you, Raul, if you want to add anything to this, or even something completely different.
No, I wanted to say two things around that, and I think the countries which had better infrastructures in terms of content creation and nurturing the content, supporting the industry, was still doing well during this time. And I think contents have always been around, and people have also created more, because now people are using only smartphones to create content. So you have social medias, you have young people adopting social medias to create all those contents. But the issue is monetizing the content is not easy. When you go to YouTube, depending on the region, of course, they have a lot of restrictions, requirements for you to make good amount of money. So what happens with people in other countries who produce content via podcasts, via Twitch, via other platforms? What happens is they have those times for advertisement, right? So when you look at corporates and public sectors across many countries, they don't usually even support the industry. So during this time, it was even harder to tell a corporate that you are doing a podcast or you are doing a Twitch, he should pay or he should give you something about it. You know, that's one thing. And the second thing is, we have many people who are already adopting, you know, payment platforms, you know, integrate that on their platforms to be supported. But another thing is, on the other side, people are not yet comfortable to enter their credit cards on platforms. So it becomes another challenge for creators to collect money from other people. So my last point is the one I saw even in the chat about music industry is people were used to live music, live concerts, but for so long the music industry have lost a lot of money in terms of selling physical CDs or other things. You know, those were the income generation for artists. So by cutting the live shows, it was very hectic, complicated for those artists to switch on a paid model online. You know, many people have done YouTube shows, but very little were asking to be paid on live shows. So that was another struggling, but it contributed a lot on the economy for countries. But that was the challenge during these times, and I think we need to bring in that aspect in terms of monetizing our content, which is online, which requires some infrastructures and policies around it.
Thank you. So we've been, I think, talking a lot as artists in different countries, and I'm enjoying what I'm seeing here on the chat as well. And I think I get a sense that in Kenya, for example, there's a lot of expectation when it comes to government support. And I'm just reading the part of the thread here that, of course, sometimes, and this is what I've seen in other countries, that the public was sometimes generally also upset when government started talking about supporting artists and the creative industries, when in our hospitals, you know, there wasn't even, you know, PPE at that point. And in most cases, you find that this was happening across Africa, and the issue of lack of government support is not one that is new. In fact, before this whole pandemic, we've always been talking about how there needs to be much more effort from government to support the creative industry. So I'm inviting everyone here, please ask a direct question if you like us to address it. But our expectations realistic when it comes to what we want government to do in supporting the arts? What change? What is working? Please share if you would like to share, especially those who operating in the continent.
Is it for?
It's for everyone, but maybe I would like to hear, because I see, and Njoki, you are involved there in many chats there. Are our expectations for government realistic? Can we at this point expect government to actually come with the a solution that we've been asking for even before the pandemic?
I hate that question is a funny question. I think it applies not just to the creative and cultural sectors. It applies to, even if you think about how education is being rolled out, if you think about healthcare, if you think about the ways in which African governments have approached investing and exploring seriously into sustainable energy forms, into green living, into figuring out what the blue economy would be. If you ask the same question, I think the answer would be the same. As regards the issue about the government responding to the asks of their citizens, the asks of different lobbies, etc. The issue is their general response to such lobbies. I don't think I don't think the issue is with the sectors themselves or that they're lobbying wrong, because they're lobbying in the way that lobbies are supposed to be done, at least legally, which is that you gather people together, you arrive at an agreement, and you start looking for a government representative who is a duty bearer to listen to you. They don't listen to you, you're now supposed to just kind of stay stuck in that loop until things change. And so then the question is, should we accept that our governments are decidedly and intentionally non-responsive? I don't think that's a thing that we should do. And if we do accept that, then what other options are there that are not necessarily government sanctioned? And you'll find that there are very few, because our countries necessarily are built to run with the government running them. So the issue is governance is bad, and the issue is that governments are not doing what they should be doing, you know. And the other thing that we keep forgetting is that lobbying costs money. So a lot of people who, and we can tell you this as HEVA because of the number of times we have to set aside time to go to meetings. You go to government offices, you will wait hours and hours and hours. The amount of time you put in before you even get an agreement to go forward with a particular project. And you'll find that multiple other people beyond even us have gone through this sort of issue. And that at least for us, with a couple of things, we've been able to move forward. You know, but when you find a wider issue that's affecting many more people, there's just a lot of slowness as regards moving things forward quickly. Another thing is to also accept that government processes are designed to be slow, and they're designed to be slow for a reason, because there's so much input that's required. And so then the thing we should be asking our governments is that with things where things need to move a little bit faster, why don't you have processes to accommodate that? And so I think it's a multiple-pronged issue, but the wider concern is that we cannot ask the public to. It'll be very, very difficult for them to do so. And that I don't think the truth is that people have not been lobbying, they have been lobbying. It's that the lobbies have been unsuccessful. So maybe the question we should ask ourselves is, what can we learn from unsuccessful lobbies? And also understand that the music sector and the creative and cultural sector lobbies are not the only lobbies that are unsuccessful. Continual lobbies to deal with femicide in Kenya and in African countries have gone unheard. People are dying, and the lobbies are unresponsive. So now when we come and say also musicians, we need to realize that the issue is an unresponsive government and not a poor lobby. You see what I mean?
Yes, in fact, there are a lot of questions, interesting questions there, and comments on just you know, what people think has been successful or not. It seems some people are thinking that there hasn't been enough lobbying done in Kenya. I think there is a lot of discussion that we can have about policy. I think for me, there's a strong divide between policy and actions, and policy is one that usually takes a lot of time. And I'm often worried about the usual profile that I know attends ONGEA, who is a musician, who has got no understanding really of, you know, policy. Even myself, if I'm making music, there are a lot of things that are probably going to change if policy is implemented, but in a very long time. And I'm interested to know, what are those immediate things that I can do? What are the tips that we can give to this profile of young musicians who are just looking to make things work? And there's one question here that I can direct to you, Evelyn, from Leslie Wells. He says, are there any global models for formalizing the music industry? And I know you can spend a lot of time on this one, but our time is almost running out. So please, in a minute, what are the key things that you think that, where are the opportunities go globally for African musicians?
Currently, during the COVID, well, I think that looking at it would be the digital part will not go away. I think this is becoming more clear to everyone, that there, for international touring, that there is a new opportunity opening up, and I mean, everybody's struggling with kind of being self-absorbed at the moment, but still at the same time, gates are opening and with all the digital components. So there isn't really that from my knowledge, at least, there isn't really a, oh, go to that one webpage and you will just survive. But it's a lot of digging around that you can do. But one thing that I would propose is before you start talking to people, try to get to know their business model and their roles, because things get done differently, and people are very even here in Europe, even in Germany, with the support, people have a lot of problems at the moment, and then if somebody approaches you who doesn't understand the way that you work and is just trying to push an artist on you, and you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? I don't have a festival right now. So just try to put yourself in the other situation. That's
what you're saying is absolutely important, and it reminds me of some of the takeaways I have, that artists now have to do much more research than before. Artists have to educate themselves. In fact, also, there are a lot of opportunities that are coming. I see that there are a lot of organizations, especially from the civil society, the new types of grants that are coming up for artists. Artists now, you have to research and find the opportunities that exist. I don't want to plug Music in Africa, but I think we do quite a lot of work in this area, where we provide opportunities on our website for artists and organizations to apply for relief funds, showcase opportunities, and all these kind of things. And it's only the artist's responsibility to familiarize yourselves with the requirements of these things, and to use these things to also diversify, change your models, and stay afloat, which we understand is not easy at all, especially during this time. I want to hear from you, Raul, just the closing one. Is there anything that you find to be particularly working on your side, or anything you want to add in closing?
Yeah, so I think the what we should do as a private entities and creatives is coming together and start creating markets that are cross-cutting and that are supportive to each other, and that means working with intellectual properties and CMOs and those kind of stuff, because it's what is happening now is that even the artists we produce or work with, when their music is played in Kenya, for example, and they are Rwandan, they are not getting anything out of it. When the music now goes beyond the region, even the continent, we don't even know about those kind of stuff. So there is a need to come together and work together on as operators of this industry, so that we can support each other in a way or another way. That will increase also our market when it comes to also supporters, organizations, corporates. We will give them more openings and more market opportunities. So I think that will be what will be the way to go for me. And also we have a success story, which actually one of the panelists shared, which worked in the US. Recently, they have released a $15 billion bill for owners of venues in the United States, and that was before that the association wasn't even there. But on 50 countries, 50 cities, I think, in the States, I think 30 or 40 of them came together, and that's how they come up with the bill, to be signed and released to support their businesses. I think us coming together, not only on the market on one country, but on many countries, it will help us also to attract more funding and more opportunities in terms of doing business and supporting what the artists we produce and the arts we produce. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm reminded here by our bosses here who are telling us that our time is up. Please don't go away. There is more content to come, and thank you so much for your participation on this session. I'm now going to hand over to Mike and the rest of the team And we hope that we can continue to ask these questions as we go into the next sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eddie and team. Fantastic, great panel, very informative, and thank you very much for fitting it into 60 minutes. Thank you to the audience. Your questions have been amazing and recorded, and I hope the majority of the questions have been answered in terms of the general theme of things. Don't go away, guys. A showcase coming up very shortly. But prior to that, I want to just take you through the next panel, which will be starting in 30 minutes at 2 o'clock Eastern Africa time. So, and that panel is, as that's being queued up, I just want to acknowledge our partners for this year at ONGEA, the 6th Eastern Africa Music Summit. And you may have noticed that I did talk earlier about our theme for this year, and I was talking about our theme for 2020 and what was briefed in. And basically what our 2020 theme was in terms of disrupt, thrive. So we cognizant of what has just happened, we are now looking at, so what happened in 2020, how can we use that to fast forward into the future? And that's a common theme for everything we are discussing over the next 3 days. And that leads us on to our next panel that will be starting in 30 minutes just after our showcase. And this is a panel that is talking about this new normal that we're in. What are the opportunities and what are the changes, what are the pivots that we have made or need to make for online education for creators. So we're discussing that transformation that happened over the last 12 months. And it happened to all of us. Suddenly we all had that technology accelerate around us, hence the 6th ONGEA Eastern African Music Summit being held virtually. So now we're going to see how that applies to education. It's moderated by my good friend David Marithi, the CEO of Creative Enterprise Center. A lot of you would know David in terms of being an entrepreneur, a creative entrepreneur himself, and a trainer for so many years. And then we have Duncan Mambugo, who is a lecturer, music lecturer, and a conductor at Kenyatta University. Then we have Francois from France, from iMusic, which is an online music education program. Then we have Natalie, who some of you may know from Santi Academy. She has a story to share with us about her 2020 and what she's doing now. And then we have Fredson Naidu from Trace Academia. So Trace has recently launched an online education platform called Trace Academia, and Fredson will be taking this through. So before we head into this next break, I'd like to acknowledge our partners for ONGEA 2021, and that is Trace itself, and Trace Radio and Digital, Thought Productions as producers, Africa Digital Leadership, and ENM